Hello, Star Trek fans, and welcome to the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast. My name is Kim.
And my name is James.
And we are no longer watching Star Trek Deep Space Nine from the beginning, one episode at a time, because we finished it. That's it. It's over.
We've come to the end. We've completed.
This is the last episode.
Okay, so this is the final episode. What are we doing then? Why are we here?
Well, we had so many emails of people saying, please don't end. Please do more episodes. So we did all the ideas we could at the end, and now we have reached the last. We've reached, as you might say, the final
yes.
of the final episodes.
Yeah, it's like one of my finals.
This
is the final.
So we are here to rebinge ourselves. This is Rebinge RebingeIt.
I'm worried, Kim, we could get into some kind of quantum anomaly here and just keep repeating.
Maybe that's where we are.
And then spiraling down through the different universes.
Maybe we're already there. Maybe we've done this a million times and Data hasn't stopped us yet.
Oh, call on the Emissary. He's pretty good. He lives outside time.
I mean, we really could go through each episode of the podcast and redo it. But we're not going to. Our plan is to rebinge this one and then to end the podcast. And yesterday we launched our new podcast, Rebinge Star Trek Voyager.
Yes.
And that will be starting in January 2024. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts, or you could also find the podcast called RebingeIt. RebingeIt will include Voyager. It will also include Star Trek Prodigy when that starts back up, and any podcast that we do in the future.
Exactly.
So your best bet is to find RebingeIt and subscribe to that one so that you never miss anything we do.
So we're taking a month off. And new episodes will start in January 2024.
Except that's a little bit of a lie, because really we're not going to actually take any time off, because we're going to start recording today.
It happens.
That's okay. You don't need to know that.
Yeah.
As far as you know, we're taking some time off.
Nobody wants to know how the sausage is made.
Some people do want to know, but I don't think they want all the details. But we like to get a little bit ahead. That way, if anything happens that we haven't planned for, we've still got episodes. I think that comes from our engineering backgrounds, where we have to release.
Yes, we have to release.
The production product must go on. You can't stop.
Also in this episode, we may actually feature Pinky the cat quite significantly, because as I'm talking, I can hear her yelling outside the door.
Well, as we are going to talk today about our very first episode of Emissary, the pilot of Deep Space Nine, I did notice quite a bit of meowing in that episode, and I listened to the next one as well, and there is a lot of meowing in both episodes. I mean, it's faint, but you can hear it. A trained ear maybe can hear it.
Yeah.
Are we ready to start?
Yes, I think we are.
So what we've done is we have rewatched the pilot episode, and then we listened to our own podcast, and so we're going to talk today sort of about how far we've come since that very first episode.
And it's a long way.
Well, the first thing that struck me in listening to the podcast, I mean, first of all, we had no idea what we were doing. That was the first time we'd ever done a podcast. Even some of the people in the network said, oh, you should record a couple and then we'll listen to it and help you along. I was like, no, we're diving in. We're going to make this happen. And so what really struck me in that first one was we didn't even know what the name of the podcast was.
Well, I think that's good for Star Trek, because Mars O'Brien went for, was it 3 seasons before they even gave him a name?
Oh, well, that's a great point. But we said something like Rebinge Star Trek DS9, and then I think at another point I said DSN. I remember that when Brian, who runs Talk Through Media, he was setting the podcast up for us at that time, and we hadn't settled on a name, and he just sort of picked it. On one page it said one thing, and then on another page it said something else, and then we ended up changing it anyway. So it was a little confusing, but that did make me laugh that's how we started. It's like, we don't even know what the hell we don't even know what the hell the name of the podcast is.
We did have a long discussion about whether we should have DS and then the number 9.
Right.
Or whether it should be DS9 spelled out.
Yeah. And then in the end, it turned out to be Deep Space Nine, just the whole thing spelled out. But anyway, that's sort of how we started. I did feel like after listening to that episode that we talk a lot faster, or maybe we edited it differently. I don't know, but I felt like it was really slow, and I don't feel that way about any of the ones we do now.
Well, I think we did pretty heavily script that, and we hadn't really got into a flow yet.
Yeah.
And it's also, at the beginning, we do sound kind of stilted until we got going.
Yeah, until we got comfortable. I mean, we've done 186, something like that, Deep Space Nine episodes and another 10 or so of the Prodigy podcast. So now it's super easy. Like, I don't think we could have done what we're doing right now in the beginning.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have had any idea how to just have a conversation about something.
And we also did the great crossover with Teeps and Kid Phoenix, Wrath of Khan, great podcast. People should listen to that. Other Star Trek nerds.
Yeah, that's right. And we did appear on some of the other podcasts on our network back when those were still going.
Yeah.
It's a lot different, I guess, than it was then. Yeah. Even our microphones are better, right? We upgraded our microphones pretty quickly in season 1, and you can definitely hear the difference. But the biggest difference comes, I'm not sure when it happens, but when I moved into the podcast booth, that really changed how our audio sounded.
I built Kim a podcast booth from scratch.
Yes, you did. And my only complaint is that it gets really hot in here. Although today it might not happen. It's pretty cold today.
Yeah, the ventilation of it's an ongoing project.
The other thing that's different is our editing wasn't as good. We're so much faster at editing now. I remember in the beginning, it would take us like 20 hours to edit an episode. And now we have a good rhythm where you do the first cut and then I do the second cut and then we're done. But what I noticed in the first couple of episodes is that there were things that we would edit out now. Like I restart, I think, a couple of times, I think, of something, and you restart something. And then there's another place where there's a gap. And I think, oh my God, we would have cut that out today. So it definitely is a podcast that sounds different.
Right. A big part of it was the learning experience of how to actually do editing. I also was watching YouTube videos, some of them by audio professionals, about how they edit and how they put together basically a show. And that really influences how I do that first edit.
Yeah, and it was the beginning of the pandemic, and we really needed something to focus on. And so we definitely dove into this head first and, started buying equipment and then started trying to figure out how to use the equipment. And we tried a lot of different things and a lot of things didn't work. A lot of things did work. But you've got this absolute perfectionist nature where everything has to be exactly correct.
Which may be good or bad.
I think it was maybe a little bit bad in the beginning because we did spend so much time editing. But we're in a good rhythm now, and hopefully that will continue into Voyager.
Yes.
Well, let's move on to what we actually talked about in the podcast itself. And there were some things that came up in that first episode that sort of lingered on with us forever. For example, the Kaiopaka Naomi Osaka was something I said in episode 1. And every time Kaiopaka's name came up after that, it was followed by Naomi Osaka. Some things you just never give up.
Well, I think I'm paraphrasing. You described it as Naomi Osaka. That's a much better name.
Yes, and Naomi Osaka hasn't played much tennis since then, actually. But
which is unfortunate.
She's coming back.
That's good. I was going to bring up that we make fun of the bedding and the lack of the bedding and talk multiple times about maybe they took some from the Enterprise, etc. And then all the way to the very end of the show, you comment about how that bed looks really uncomfortable that Julian's sleeping in.
Oh, right, in the very last episode.
Yeah. I mean, first to the last, we're still mocking the bedding situation.
I don't know if it was so much the bed or just the stupid way that Alexander Siddig was laying in the bed. Like, he couldn't even act how to be comfortable.
Wow, you did not like that character.
Yeah, or the acting. I was not impressed. I did look at an orb in episode 1 and called it a migraine trigger because it has the sort of flickering thing that my migraines have. And we stuck with migraine triggers for a long time as a description of the orbs. I don't think we ever gave that one up.
No, we continued that through the whole show.
Yep. I think I called Ducat gross for the first time, too, in episode 1. So it was just setting the... just sort of setting the table for how I would feel about Ducat all the way until his demise.
Well, what's funny is you made a really good call on that because as the show progressed, you really do see the level of depravity that is Ducat.
Yeah, that's a good word for it. We called for a need for an HR department. That came up several times, too, over the years. And I was listening, just coincidentally, I was listening to another Star Trek podcast this morning, and they were talking about the fact that Starfleet really needed an HR department and didn't have it. And I was like, yes. Yeah.
Well, you make the comment as well of this strange little nun-looking woman grabs Sisko's ear without asking.
Oh, that was horrifying to me. I mean, they sort of gave up on that. We didn't see a lot of that going forward. We saw it a few times, but it was so prevalent in episode 1. And I just found it really disturbing. That would make me crazy if somebody just grabbed my ear out of the blue.
For the first few episodes, I think I carried it on a fair while as well. I was bringing up how they kept on sort of showing Miles as almost this sort of Irish labourer.
Yeah.
And this sort of working man thing. And Miles's relationship was always just portrayed so badly.
Yeah. From episode 1 all the way through. Yeah.
It was very bad soap opera. I never really liked that.
Yeah, it wasn't, I don't know, they couldn't quite figure out how to put drama into the story without adding conflict. And it's okay to have conflict, it's okay to have drama, but it seemed really forced in some cases.
Yeah.
In this particular one, what we talked about was that they had moved to the station and Keiko didn't have a job. She didn't have anything to do. And it's like, did you not talk about that before you got there? I mean, you waited until you got there and then you said, oh, I don't have anything to do. Right. I mean, you ought to be having that discussion.
Well, if we're talking about themes that go out through the whole show, I did keep on pointing out how those two should never have been married.
Yeah.
Miles would have been happier with Neela.
Or Julian.
That would not actually have been a bad idea, but I don't think you showed that kind of things in the 90s because the network execs with the sweater wrapped around the neck would probably freak out.
Yes, unless it was women.
Oh, yeah.
I still don't know what star dates mean. That's still the same from episode 1.
Ah, yes, your comment. Don't tell me I don't care.
It was also where the provisional government started, except we didn't start saying drink until episode 2, which was funny.
That is now ingrained in my brain, thank you. When I re-listen to the episode, every time one of us said provisional government, I am like, drink.
Drink.
I don't think either of us have said provisional government so many times ever in our lives.
No one ever has.
I mean, when I was at high school, I studied history, and one of the things we did was the Russian Revolution and the lead up to it, which included talking about the post-Tsarist provisional government. And even then, I don't think I said provisional government as many times.
The last thing that I have on my list is that the actress who played Jennifer cannot act. And it drove me crazy in that episode, and it drove me crazy the few times she appeared after.
You did not let Jennifer go.
I'm sure she can act. I'm sure she's a lovely person, but this was just not her role. It just never worked from the beginning.
I think, in defense of Jennifer, I think it's difficult to drop people into those roles, and especially when they're not established characters. And I think you really need people who are maybe that top 10% in acting who can drop into these roles and roll with them.
Well, it's probably hard to do if you've not acted before.
Yeah.
Like, they talk about character actors, and I think there's a lot of character actors in the sort of side parts, right, on this show. And we also talked a lot in season 1 about some of the amazing actors they had on.
Right.
I mean, they had Brian Keith on in season 1. And of course, Louise Fletcher joined at the end of season 1.
Yeah.
And we had that woman in the episode about Dax, the one who had played Data's mother. I don't remember what her name was, but I mean, she was so amazing. So we had some really fantastic performances. Yeah. And so, yes, this character just sort of paled next to all of them. And I didn't look at her history, or if I did, I don't remember it. Maybe this, she hadn't had a lot of acting before that. But you might be right. But when you're dropped into these small parts, you have to be able to stand up in them. And I just didn't think she did.
I think that's maybe why when you see a lot of these sort of single episode character actors, maybe that's the reason why they have so many credits. Because they are so good at being dropped into this. You're in one episode, this is the character you're playing, and they can run with it.
Right.
Like the actor, I don't remember his name, I probably should have looked it up, who played Rasot right at the end. He's in like 3 episodes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was great.
And that guy gets Cardassians.
Mm-hmm.
He plays this textbook Cardassian with all the sort of the puffery and the bigotry and everything that makes them up. And it's like, wow, this guy is dropped in and gets it day one.
Yeah. He read the brief about the natural xenophobia.
Right. Yeah.
Well, did you take note of anything you laughed at our podcast when you listened to it? What were some of the things that you found funny?
I still laugh at your comment right at the beginning where Sisko says to Jake, it'll be fun. And you make the comment, the first of many lies.
Well, he tells him that there will be kids there and it'll be so much fun. And it's like, there aren't any kids there.
And later on, you also make a comment to Jake, he was so lied to.
But I think Jake knew. He seemed pretty unhappy where he was going. And then I guess the joke is really that in the end, he didn't want to leave. Like, in the episode, The Visitor, he never wanted to go.
Right.
Because it became his home. So and I can understand that.
I also still laugh at you not wanting to call Ops. You're like, it's the bridge. I want to call it the bridge.
I have that in my next section. Yeah, I don't know why I couldn't get over that. I mean, I eventually did. It stopped bothering me, but there was just something weird about it. Yeah, I was obsessed with Ops in the beginning. I did make a complaint in episode 1 about the ESPN app and how when you would go into it to watch something, it would tell you how it ended before you watched it, which used to just make me crazy. But they have fixed that problem. But 3 years ago, it still did that. I'm sure it's because they listen to our podcast.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Our podcast is a little time capsule in a lot of ways there.
Yeah. I do love how we kept saying, like, this is going to take us 3 years to do all these episodes, and now it's over.
Yeah, it is kind of strange.
It's like it flew by.
I remember doing the math on that and going, you realize this is going to take us 3 years to get through.
And now it just seems like it took months to get through.
Well, time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, exactly. You already mentioned the beds. That was funny. I did laugh at that we were talking about stealing bunks from the Enterprise. And that came up, I think, a few times later as well.
That would be something they would do on Lower Decks.
Yeah, that's a good point. That would have fit on Lower Decks.
Right.
I had this strange take in that episode about Dax as being written as like a dude in a woman's body.
Yeah.
I forgot that I had said that or even thought that. I was definitely concerned that's how she was going to be portrayed.
Yeah.
Almost like an excuse to make a female character act the way the male writers wanted her to because she was, really a guy. Yeah. And that's not what happened after that episode even. I don't remember ever thinking that again, but I definitely took note of that. It was one of the things I think that I was really complaining about in episode 1, but that seemed to sort of fizzle away.
Again, another thing for the 90s, this would have been a really great character to use to explore or to explain the concepts of someone who is transgendered. And Dax, with having these memories of these backgrounds, Esri kind of hints at that much later. But I guess at this point in time, showing same-sex relationships on TV was rather taboo for the networks.
One of the things that was really eye-opening, though, about that is how many emails we got from people on that subject.
Yeah.
And people who really related to the character of more Jadzia, maybe, than Esri, because they had more time with her. But they related to her as how it paralleled the trans experience. And it was really great to hear that from so many people and, just to see how other people connected to the show in a way that maybe you and I couldn't really understand. Yeah. And it was eye-opening. Any other funny things from that episode?
Pretty much the whole episode.
Yeah, we're fun people.
Is it vain to say that sometimes I go back and I listen to the episode because it's pretty funny?
So that you can laugh at your own jokes?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, if you're laughing at your own jokes, it might be vain, yes. And you do sometimes tell me, oh, this was really funny on the podcast when I said this. You do say that sometimes.
Nah. Well, it's funny. What can I say?
Yeah, we're fun people. That's what I'm telling you. My brother listened to that, and maybe only that episode. I'm not sure he ever listened to another one, but he did say that he felt like our podcast of episode 1 was better than the pilot itself. I'm not sure he's much of an expert on Star Trek, though, so.
I still like the pilot, even if it has holes.
It's a very good pilot. We both gave it a thumbs up, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'll move on to my next section about how many boring complaints I had. I had a lot of things I was complaining about, and maybe because I just wasn't really sure, didn't really know how to podcast yet, so maybe was overreaching on some of the complaints.
Yeah.
And I wasn't convinced I was going to be able to get into the show because I couldn't get into it before when it originally aired. So I just didn't know where we were going because we recorded several episodes before we even started releasing. So, was it even really going to be released? I don't know. Would we get to episode 3 and I just went, I am not watching this. I hate this show.
I'm out.
I mean, that's not what happened, obviously. And of course, season 1 was very bumpy. There are some really awful things that happen in season 1.
Yeah.
I stand by some of the things that I complained about, and we'll talk about those, I think, later. But I admit I was too complaining. I complained about how long the theme song was. I was obsessed with that. And then I was also obsessed with Ops. Why couldn't I just call it Ops? I don't know. I think I was being a little ridiculous. I did see one of the reviews. I think it's on Apple Podcasts. I'm not sure. But somebody said that season 1 was a bit tough of our podcast to get through. And I know that's aimed at me, and I do understand.
Well,
but I still say, not a great season. But once we got through it, once we got through season 1, we didn't even have to get all the way through. Once we got to Duet, I feel like I pretty much turned around.
Well, I think you're watching the show as a Star Trek viewer who had a great love of TNG and had expectations of what you wanted from a Star Trek show. And I think your honest opinions were coming out. You weren't trying to like a show just because it was Star Trek. You were saying that you didn't watch it because you basically didn't like it. It's an honest opinion. And I think that balances out me basically being a fanboy for this show.
I never thought they should cancel it because other people liked it. It just wasn't for me.
And maybe part of that is the show creators didn't work hard enough initially to make it appeal to another set of viewers. It took them a while to get there. You could say they were trying something different. But I guess this comes down to that whole argument of, do you try and appeal to an existing fan base, or do you try something new? Or is this more balanced with, okay, it wasn't as good as it could be. You weren't getting the hints of how good the show could end up being because there was a lot of tropiness in it. Maybe that's it.
Well, I wasn't happy with the way women were being portrayed or being treated in their workplace. And I guess I question, were they really trying to write to a new audience, or were they just trying to write to the audience that they thought watched Star Trek?
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
Just a bunch of men or boys of a certain demographic.
Yeah.
And sort of not accepting that women actually were going to watch the show.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Young professional women.
Of course, looking back now, we talk about how many scientists, male and female scientists, were impacted by Star Trek. So it's surprising that we stuck with it.
Yeah.
That women still stuck with it, even though the female characters weren't written that well. Kira was written well later, but not so much right at the beginning.
Yeah. But I wouldn't say your criticisms of the show are invalid or too harsh.
No, but it's maybe just a bit too much when you're trying to get into a new podcast to listen to somebody griping about the show maybe that you love. So that's why when we re-recorded a new trailer to stick onto this show so that people can still find it, and we even say that in the trailer, it's like, don't give up just because I don't really like season 1.
Yeah.
So how about some things in the podcast that now, looking back on it or listening back to it 3 years later, that you found surprising?
I have the problem that because this wasn't my first rewatching of the show, that I'd seen a lot of episodes before, there's a difficulty in me giving an overall picture of what I think about things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we talk about the prophets, how they don't understand time, and watching that from your perspective, you can see a big difference in the writing, the way it changes.
Right.
And for me, the first thing I could shout at that is, oh, well, it's funny that they're saying that considering they're his parents.
Yeah, that's true. As things would get revealed, I would be more and more surprised and impressed that you were able to keep some of those things from me, because that's not something you can normally do. But you were doing it for a good cause, because I don't really like spoilers. And it's better if my viewership evolves naturally, right? That's the way that we wanted it to be.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I can see that something like that would have been difficult. And any time when I would sort of guess about something happening, if it was right or wrong, too, that must have been hard to just go, no, that's not going to happen.
Well, I so wondered when he appeared the first time to tell you, maybe that's not actually Martog.
Oh, yeah. That was the whole thing was a shocker to me with Martog. Yeah, for sure.
And don't get too attached to Gowron.
Well, but we have Gowron all the way till the end, really.
Pretty much.
The one big thing that I guessed before it happened was the guy in the old man sweater who was Garrick's dad.
Oh.
In Aberntane.
Yep. That was a funny one. I mean, you got that one like day one. Oh, yeah, it's Garrick's dad.
Yeah, I don't know why I knew that, but I knew that from the beginning.
That was funny.
Well, in the podcast itself, I was very surprised to hear how unhappy I was with Sisko.
Yeah.
I didn't like the way, in particular, this happened in episode 2 of the podcast, where Sisko he sort of manhandles Kira. He like grabs her by the arms and sort of throws her around. And, he's a lot bigger than she is. I really didn't like that. And there's a couple times, too, where he's towering over her. And I just thought that is inappropriate in the workplace. And I was really bothered by that. And I did not like that about Sisko. But of course, I became such a huge fan of the character and of the actor over time. But in the beginning, I mean, this is a good example of where I think they were sort of making a mistake.
Yeah.
They're trying to get you to connect with this new captain. He wasn't the captain yet in the beginning, but they're trying to get you to connect with the new leader of the show. And you're not really making him a great guy. First of all, he doesn't like Captain Picard, he blames him for the death of his wife, which I understand, but it's a choice that you're making in episode 1 to have him be antagonistic to the captain that we just spent 7 years loving, right? All the Star Trek people at that time.
I could see you not liking that.
So you do that, and then I don't think he treated Kira very well in the beginning. That evolved, but I was surprised to be reminded of that.
I think this comes back to them struggling to try and find a tone for the show.
Yeah, probably.
I didn't bring that up in the first episode because I don't think I really noticed that before. That there is this sort of, this phase where they're getting the character, they're trying to get the character solidified. And they're struggling a bit with Sisko.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Yes. Looking back.
Right. I think it was good that I managed to stay on topic for most of the pod.
Yeah, you did.
I did manage to get a reference into First Contact, the greatest Star Trek movie ever.
You did as well, yeah. I don't know, though, if we went back and listened to the unedited cut, how much did you go off topic? We do that a lot less now because we know that editing is such a pain.
Yeah, I think it was only 3 hours of recording for that one.
Probably. Well, it was a long episode, too.
And I might not have stayed on topic much.
Well, while the Sisko thing was a surprise to me, what was not a surprise were some of my other complaints, which I think are completely valid, even though I was pointing out some things I think maybe I whined about too much. The unsafe work environment, I think, is important.
Yeah.
And it just so is part of my life and my career having to deal with things like that. So I didn't like having to watch it, and I don't want it in Starfleet because that's supposed to be the evolved, perfect thing, and it was not.
Right.
It was a bad example of it. And I know I talked about it in that episode 1, but there were some times later in season 1 where I was really annoyed about the fact that Kira, for example, there's the episode, the first time we meet the Nagus.
Yes.
And he's basically assaults Kira right in front of Sisko, and he does nothing. Women need allies in the workplace. So I think those were valid complaints that I had, and I know we kept bringing things like that up later because those are real. Did you have anything like that you were not surprised to hear yourself say?
I think because it was a rewatching, there really wasn't anything in there that I was surprised that I said. A lot of my opinions on this show and what I'm saying had already been formed by this point. So it was basically saying out loud what I already thought, if that makes sense.
Oh, for sure. And also, you've listened to this episode more than I have. I don't think I've listened to it since we released it.
Keep going back with the jokes.
I do want to talk a little bit about this issue that I was really harping on about Kira in episode 1 and about her being a stereotype of an angry woman in film and TV. The introduction that we had to Kira, we heard her shouting before we saw her.
Right.
I think that for me was a real turnoff. Because immediately after that happens, Miles says something to Sisko like, oh, have you ever worked with a Bajoran woman before? Like, there's something unique about Bajoran women being...
They're always angry.
...difficult to work with. Yeah, or always angry. And it's like, no, what we found was that Kira was Kira. She wasn't the same as every Bajoran woman. Yeah. Nobody's ever the same as every other person.
They probably hadn't written it yet, but Kira's also suffering from PTSD.
Well, and of course I didn't know that yet. So... I needed to learn more about her before I started to appreciate her. And that started happening later in the season, like when we got to that The Moon of Idiots episode, Battle Lines.
Oh, yeah.
And then even later when we got to Progress with Brian Keith, where we really started to learn about Kira.
Oh, yeah.
But in episode 1, I didn't know that about her. I didn't know her full arc, right? I didn't know where she was going. Yeah. I know that I do a whole thing very late in season 7 talking about how fantastic of a character Kira turned out to be, and the most developed female character in Trek, certainly up until we got Voyager.
Yeah.
But in episode 1, one of the reasons why I stopped watching was because I didn't like the way she was being portrayed, and I thought, I am not going to watch a stereotype of a woman. I'm just not going to do it. And it was such a turnoff. And now what's so interesting, knowing her full arc and where she goes, now I could look at it so much differently. Kira is the one who saves the day in the episode. she is the hero of the show.
Yeah.
So it's so funny because I was very clouded by, I didn't like that stereotypical thing that was going on with her. So I didn't even notice. She was the one who saves the day. It was her idea to move the station.
Right.
She was basically saving Bajor by doing that. But I couldn't see it because I was just so stuck on that portrayal.
Yeah. Yeah, that first episode did rely a little heavily on pulling in tropes, whether it was Kira or Miles or relationships. Yeah.
Yeah. And Kira's hair was pretty awful in the pilot, though.
Oh, dear.
Really only at the beginning.
Yeah.
It was better even by the middle of that episode. And then by episode 2, she cut it off and it was great until season 7.
You know, that is something that is a repeating theme. We do talk about the haircuts a lot.
Yeah. Just for fun.
Did it start in the first one? I don't remember.
The first time I really remember us talking about hair is when we got to Vortex.
Oh, yeah. Greatest on-screen wig in Star Trek.
I do think we talked about costumes, though, before then.
Yeah.
Maybe there wasn't a lot of hair talk.
I know I brought it up in the series wrap-up of that's something I personally find a little disappointing of. We did see a lot more of different alien-looking races and peoples, and they sort of dialed that back later on in the series.
Yeah, because they were focused on so many characters already.
Yeah.
They weren't adding new ones each week. Yeah, that's definitely true.
But it would have been nice to see more odd aliens in the background. Like, remember the guys who had looked like they had boxes on their heads and things like that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And the guys with the tin foil. Yeah.
Exactly.
That was all season 1.
Yep.
Well, were there any things you took note of that we talked about, but then became very wildly different later as the show evolved?
Well, of course, there's the prophets. I'm pretty sure they didn't know what the prophet storyline was going to be.
They did not. It was very different from how they were portrayed in episode 1 to how they were portrayed in season 7. I mean, they even say they should destroy Cisco, and they don't know who he is.
Right. It's like, I think Sarah's going to have something to say about this.
Yeah. What is going on there? When he found the orb of the emissary, I can't remember now.
Yeah.
Did he release the prophet that was his mother?
I'm going to make the assumption yes.
Because we never see her before then.
Yes, because something came out of the box, so I assume that is the Sarah prophet.
Well, maybe they didn't know then.
But they must have put Sarah in there.
I mean, if Cisco's mother had been trapped.
But that would imply the other prophets didn't know what Sarah was doing when they know everything about all time.
About everything, yeah. I mean, we talked about how it's difficult to write that even.
Yeah, when you create omnipotent, godlike characters who know everything from all time, it's a little bit difficult to have a plot line.
Yeah, it's true.
The hugest change, I think, of all of them, Nog.
Yes, that was on my list too. He was a little delinquent in episode 1, and really for a while, until he became interested in Starfleet. Yeah, probably the character that changed the most from episode 1 to the end of the show.
Did we get much of Rom in this one? I don't think we did.
No, I don't think we get Rom at all in this episode. But we do have Quark hissing, which... What happened to the Ferengi hissing? We didn't see a lot of that after episode 1.
I think we had one more, the episode with the flaky skin people. Sanctuary, was it?
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, we had like one more hissing and that was the end of it. We're done with that. Wave hand.
Odo really looked different.
Yes.
In episode 1. I think we did talk about that as the show evolved, to that his look was changing quite a bit.
They moved him to much more of a smooth face look.
Right.
A small thing. Miles's hair, it seems very well put together in this episode, and then as the show progresses, it turns more and more into Miles turns up on set and they're like, yeah, it's good, on you go.
Yeah, we get a little poofy and a little long, yeah. Well, maybe it was because Keiko wasn't around. Remember, she was off doing something a lot of the times in later seasons, as the actress didn't want to be on the show all the time.
Which is a shame. Then again, you know, it might have been dreadfully written, so...
I don't know if it was because of that or if she didn't want to be part of something or, you know, tied into something for so long, especially when her part would have been quite small.
Yeah.
But they could have done interesting things with her. I mean, she's a very good actor.
Right.
But yeah, they didn't. Instead, they did things like Time's Orphan, which is one of the worst episodes of the show.
And when they did that great Parates episode where she was possessed, that...
Oh, yeah. The Assignment.
Right.
Yeah, that was a great episode. Well, even on TNG, when there was the one where, well, there were a couple of them that she was quite good in. Like, Data's Day
Yeah.
was quite good, but she was also good in the one where she's having the baby and Miles is taken over by an alien. That was pretty good too.
Yeah.
I don't remember how long the station was just trashed like it was in episode
Yeah.
1, because it was a mess. And then it even got blown up quite a bit. So it was worse.
It was pretty much cleaned up by episode 2. They were still doing a lot
Okay.
of merging Federation, Bajoran, and Cardassian technology together for a while with Miles.
Right.
That whole trashed look was pretty good, though.
Ducat's hair was pretty bad, as I recall, in episode 1. They didn't know what they were doing with his hair yet.
Yeah. Well, they really radically changed the Cardassians from TNG to Deep Space Nine.
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
This is the first look of the new Cardassians. So if you
Yeah.
knew who they were and then saw them in this, it's like, where are the Cardassians? Who are these guys?
It's a good thing the internet didn't really exist then, or at least social media.
Oh, people would have been freaking out.
People would have been furious, the gatekeepers.
Right.
One of the changes in the podcast that I really appreciate from the beginning to the end is that you started to do every other detailed outline
Yeah.
of the episode. So
Yeah.
it wasn't all on me each time. That was actually really good because that was a lot of work.
We're continuing that with Rebinge Star Trek Voyager as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, do you have any other notes? I have only one thing left on my list.
I have a new radical idea about the show.
Okay.
The real story of Deep Space Nine, the entire arc, is about the struggle of Kira finding a way to get her office back. It starts with her having an office, and it ends with her having her office back. That is the arc of the series.
Yeah, that's true. I think we talked about in one of the episodes that you could look at the entire arc of the series as the evolution of Garrick. He's not in episode 1, but he's in episode 2.
Yeah.
So he starts very early and he's all the way in till the end. And the way he starts versus the way he ends is a pretty incredible arc.
I would love to have seen more use of Garrick. He was such an interesting character.
Oh, I completely agree. He disappeared, I think in season 6, was it? And we hardly saw him at
Yeah.
all. No, I agree. We could have seen more. My one last note is that Bashir appears for the very first time at 42 minutes and 12 seconds. And he makes his first inappropriate move in the workplace right out of the gate. I mean, he is very young and they play that up, but
Yeah.
he really should have taken the anti-harassment in the workplace course. I mean, it's required.
If there's one thing that's come from, if we look at the first show through to the end, it's my take that Bashir is some kind of predator. I really think they didn't do the character any favors in the writing. And although Sadiq was in some good episodes and some episodes I really liked, I think what they did to the character was terrible.
Yeah, even the actor knew that what was going on with him and Jedzi in season 1 didn't make sense and wasn't right. That is definitely true. He's not the exact kind of character I normally don't like.
Yeah.
Because we talked about this before. Riker was never one of my favorite characters in the early days anyway, really until the movies. I don't like the sort of bro type, trying to be super macho. I don't know, it's just not for me. But as he gained wisdom, he became much more interesting. And also they made him so funny in the movies. So I think maybe that changed it. And I wouldn't describe Bashir as like that. He didn't have that sort of bro thing going on, but he had a very sort of oily, slimy trait.
Yes, a predator.
That I couldn't trust. Yeah, like you would describe as a predator. But I found it as something that in my workplace, I would avoid.
Yeah.
I would know to avoid somebody like that.
I feel he's the one character, I don't feel like he grew. I feel he's making the same mistakes and behaving the same way from beginning to end.
Yeah, I agree. He's pretty much in the same exact place as he was at the beginning. There were moments in the show where he was much more interesting and much better, right? But yeah, it did feel like we sort of ended where we started with him.
I feel Sadiq was let down by the writing here.
Well, no need to harp on that anymore. Okay, do you have any other notes or does that wrap it up?
Not really. I just think it's funny. We're a little bit stiff at the beginning.
We are, yeah. We're so much cooler now. I think, too, we weren't exactly sure how it was going to go in terms of reception. We didn't know if anybody would listen. I mean, it took kind of a while for us to build an audience, and I still see people starting at the beginning and working their way through the podcasts.
Yeah.
But we didn't really know if anybody would listen. And then we started getting these crazy emails, and by crazy, I mean crazy great.
Yes.
And that really sort of helped to drive us and to keep going. It's like, oh, people are enjoying this. They are getting something out of this. Let's keep going.
Yeah.
And I think that too sort of freed us a little bit to go, oh, it's okay. If people hate it, they're not going to listen. The people who love it are still listening.
I will add to that. I was really surprised at the amount of overanalysis we would get from people. I love doing overanalysis. You know me and building backstories for characters. The fact that we got so many other listeners who are sending us their versions of the backstory or what they think of my opinions on it and their takes.
Yeah.
That's always been really interesting. And that was something that surprised me.
The geeks found their people in us.
We found our people.
Yeah. Well, that wraps up the last episode of Rebinge Deep Space Nine. Again, please go and find Rebinge It, the podcast, or Rebinge Star Trek Voyager if you just want Voyager. But I would recommend you find Rebinge It and subscribe to that because that one will have all of our podcasts. Even when we're done with Voyager, we move on to whatever we'll move on after that. It'll all be in that Rebinge It feed. We put it up on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, which I guess is going into YouTube, but it is also on YouTube. And it's available on Overcast and Pocket Casts and places like that. If there is a platform where you can't find it, please let me know. Email me at rebingeit@gmail.com.
And we'll be covering Prodigy again soon as season 2 hits.
Yeah, I'll probably point the Prodigy feed into Rebinge It as well, which means season 1 will appear in there as well.
So you'll be getting more content from us, if you like our content, that is. And I guess if you're listening to this point, you probably do.
If you're still hanging on at this point, you're the super fan. So you can continue to email us at rebingeit@gmail.com. Even if you're listening to this years later after we've recorded it, please feel free to send us any emails that you want about this podcast, about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, or anything in Star Trek. Rebingeit@gmail.com will always be our email address.
And even into the future, I will guarantee I will have opinions on Deep Space Nine.
And now I can have opinions on the whole thing because I've seen it.
Yes, exactly. I can now talk to you about it.
That's right. All right. Well, we will continue to be on that thing that used to be called Twitter. We are also on Instagram and we are on YouTube and Threads, all at RebingeIt. And you can continue to chat with us on the Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/Star Trek TTM podcasts.
Thanks for joining us on the final episode of Rebinge Deep Space Nine. This has been James.
And this is Kim. And we will see you on Rebinge Star Trek Voyager.
That's it from me.
And that's it from me. That was pretty good.